Hey guys, so I know I just made a video yesterday ranking the different classes and how hard it is to get to their theoretical damage ceiling. If you guys haven't watched that video yet, I'll link it over here in this corner. But I wanted to make this video today to talk about why that tier list doesn't really matter, I guess. I know it's kind of funny that I just made that video and I'm talking about it doesn't really matter. But honestly, I made that tier list mostly just to have fun. You know, I think it's very interesting and fun to make tier lists like that, especially I did it with chat, so that was very entertaining, interactive, and fun. But to be honest, I don't think that really matters for most people. Because here's the thing. It's a theoretical skill cap for a reason. It's a theoretical damage ceiling for a reason. It's because, for the most part, we aren't really able to reach it. Most people aren't really able to reach that. And even those who are at the tippy top of the game and, you know, the most skill at their classes, I'd say that those people probably won't reach that theoretical ceiling in most of their pools. But they will be much more likely to reach it than the average player. But for the most part, they won't be able to reach it. And I think that I actually, you know, also made another video the other day talking about Snow Powder's tier list and how that was kind of BS because it was made by some rando, actually. But I think the theoretical concept of the way he made his tier list made a lot of sense because he talked about those classes at the top being the classes that he sees on MVP the most, rather than talking about how high their damage ceiling is or like how strong they are. And that ability to MVP really has to do with this one idea. And I don't know if there's a term for this, but I'm going to coin it the average DPS ceiling. Because you have, of course, you have the DPS floor, right? You have the DPS ceiling up here. But then somewhere in the middle here, depending on your class, it can be somewhere different. You have the average DPS ceiling for that class. And what I would say this average DPS ceiling is that this is the average player or maybe the above average player and how hard it is. Like that is the damage ceiling for them in most situations. In the average run, in the average raid, for the most part, if you're performing to what you're normally performing to, you're going to be doing this amount of damage. And that, I think, is the most important number, the most important damage ceiling for most of us. Because, again, most of us, even the best players, aren't really going to be able to hit that theoretical ceiling for the most part. So I think a good way to visualize this is through a graph. So let's plot one. Now, the y-axis is going to be the damage of the class. So this is going to be different for every single class in terms of where they can reach as its peak. The Surge Deathblade, for example, is going to have a higher peak number than, let's say, a Demonic Shadowhunter. The Shadowhunter will never reach that damage peak that the Deathblade will have. Whereas on the other axis, we're going to have player skill. So on the left, the closest to the center of the axis is going to be the least skilled players. So players who are basically, you know, droolers, let's just say. And all the way on the other side of the axis at the end are going to be the players who are at the top of their game, at the top of their class, the most skilled players at their class. So let's start by graphing out what a Predator Slayer would look like. As you can see, with the Predator Slayer, when we start at 0, it actually starts moving up in terms of damage pretty quickly, meaning that you don't need to have that much skill to reach this level of damage. But as we move further and further out in terms of the skills that the player possesses, even though you have a player that's much more skilled than that of the previous player, it's not like the damage ceiling goes up by that much because it's very easy to reach that theoretical damage ceiling. And the difference between the average damage ceiling and the theoretical damage ceiling isn't that big. The average player is going to be able to get pretty close to that theoretical damage ceiling, and the average player being right in the middle of this x-axis. Now, if we look at another class that we talked about yesterday, the Eosophist, we describe this class as one of the hardest classes to hit the damage ceiling with. So this line that we have for the Eosophist is very different. As you can see, as opposed to starting off with an exponential growth in damage, the lower skilled players are going to be doing pretty much Z DPS. And as we move towards the average player, the amount of damage that you're going to do really doesn't go up by that much. But then when you get closer to the most skilled players, the amount of damage you do goes up exponentially. And this is what I call a big difference between the average damage that the player can do versus the theoretical damage that the player can do. There's a huge gap in between the average damage and the theoretical damage ceiling that the player can do, which is why this class is so hard to get to the damage ceiling with. And this is also why, for the average player, it doesn't really matter what the theoretical damage ceiling is because most players aren't going to be able to reach that theoretical damage ceiling. It just is really, really hard. And even the most skilled players are most days not going to be able to reach that theoretical damage ceiling because it really is just that hard. So as you can see with the comparison of these two classes, what really matters the most is the average damage ceiling as opposed to the theoretical damage ceiling. So that's why when you're picking your class and picking what you want to play, I mean, some of you guys can think about the theoretical damage ceiling, right? If that's what your goal is, to be able to get close as that theoretical damage ceiling as possible, then the previous tier list that I made is actually pretty good and important. But for the majority of players who probably aren't going to be able to reach that theoretical damage ceiling, you should really just think about classes that perform well on average and where they are on that list. For example, again, Predator Slayer is going to be very high on that list because they're going to be on average performing much better than most other classes. But a class like Pistolier Deadeye, right, on average is going to be having a lower number than this Predator Slayer, even though they're putting them in the same amount of effort. But also, its theoretical damage ceiling is probably lower than the average Predator Slayer ceiling as well. So that's going to be a much weaker class. Of course, at the end of the day, you should pick the class that's fun for you. But if we're talking about pure damage, that is how it is. You should, rather than thinking about what the damage ceiling is for the class, you should think about what the average damage ceiling is. So not the theoretical damage ceiling, but the average damage ceiling, at least for most players. So hopefully that makes sense for you. Of course, there's definitely gonna be a lot of Giga Chads in the chat saying like, oh, I can definitely reach that theoretical damage ceiling easy. But, you know, outside of those couple of us that can, or at least get close, I'm definitely not one of those people. I think the average damage ceiling is what we should be worrying about the most. All right, guys. Hopefully this video was interesting and helpful to you guys. If it was, let me know down in the comment section below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, hit the sub button, ring the bell for notifications. And also, I stream every single night on twitch.tv/MisoXShiro starting at 10 p.m. PST. So you can catch me there streaming live. And hopefully you can join me. And if I don't see you there, hopefully I'll see y'all on the next video. All right, guys. Peace out.